We'll get started now. There's a couple more minutes for people to join the room before our first presentation, but I'll do my introductions now. So welcome. This is the third of our LifeStories live program of presentations. We've had an event on industry contribution to responding to the COVID crisis. We've had an event on academia, also in terms of projects and responding to the COVID crisis. And for those of you who are either thinking I've missed an event or forgotten one, we also had a launch event. So this is the fourth presentation, but it's the third in a series starting academia, industry, and then NHS. And then in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be moving on to digital presentation, something specialising on digital on the 22nd of September. So today is the opportunity to hear a little bit about the NHS projects, and then on the 22nd of September, we can move on to the digital programme. So welcome. My name's Gwyn Tudor. I'm chairing today on behalf of MediWales. MediWales is the life science network for Wales. For those of you who are not familiar with the organisation, it's a membership organisation. It's independent, but it's owned and it's delivered by its members, its board of directors, and the team at MediWales. Its responsibility is to provide collaborative opportunities, interaction, one-to-one engagement with organisations in the life science sector in Wales. That's academic, business and clinical, and those who want to work with us from outside of Wales. We also provide promotional opportunities. We publish a number of magazines, LifeStories being one of them, that's the name of this event today. LifeStories is our Welsh innovation showcase publication that we produce in collaboration with our health and social care colleagues and Welsh Government to highlight the the great work that's going on in Wales in health and industry and academia around innovation and collaboration. So LifeStories publication is our Welsh publication, and then we also collaborate with organisations beyond Wales to produce the UK life science industry publication as well. So that's the promotion. The collaboration between organisations and representation. So we don't say that we lobby government, partly because we work with government very closely. We have lots of government colleagues, and so I would say a better description would be that we advise and that we make sure that there's a life science industry and a life science sector voice as and when government needs that input into activities and projects. So we've been doing that throughout the COVID situation, and that's something that, given the lockdown and given the fact that we're all working remotely, is a role that's actually become significantly more important. Keeping those connections, keeping the voice of the sector and the connectivity within the sector is essentially important at this time, in order for us to keep working on technology, innovation, collaboration, and procurement. It's been quite clear in the news over the last few months that procurement of specific items, in particular PPE, testing, digital products, has been vitally important, and the efforts in order to do that have accelerated considerably. I think we'll be hearing a little bit more about that in some of the presentations we have today. And so the role that the different parts of the sector, the NHS and industry working together to address issues, has really been highlighted over the last few months. Much as it's been terrible and challenging times for a lot of people, and we couldn't understate that, and everybody knows, everybody has a personal experience concerning the COVID pandemic, but we've also learned a lot, and we've heard a lot about success stories, successful innovations, successful partnerships, times where NHS has stepped up. We've learned an awful lot about how how wonderful individuals and organisations within the NHS have stepped up to address the crisis. We've also learned an awful lot about companies who have developed new products, new processes, and done all of that at an increased, accelerated pace in order to try and address the pandemic in real time. So that's really the theme of this programme of events, and today it's about listening to colleagues from the health and social care side. So it's not only health and social care professionals on the front line, although they are included. It's also the research activity, the materials testing, and the innovation teams who have also been contributing to the effort. So I think I'm about on time to introduce our first speaker, and I'm glad to see Matthew and Nicola's profiles appear in my screen. So glad to see that you are both here and ready and waiting. And so I'm really pleased to be able to hand over to Nicola Williams, who is Director of Support and Delivery, and Matt Morgan, who is Head of Critical Care Research and Development at Health and Care Research Wales, and on speaking on the subject of the role of Wales in urgent COVID-19 research. So Matthew and Nicola, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm going to hand over to Matt in a minute, who will give a real overview of what it's really felt on the front line. But my role is around coordinating research and ensuring the support and the delivery of research happens in Wales. And so I thought I'd just contextualise what Matt's about to say by giving a very brief overview of the response to COVID-19 in terms of the urgent public health research that's been and continues to be undertaken in Wales. And this has been very much part of a UK endeavour, part of a UK prioritisation, and our responsiveness to putting research and science, as we well know, centre stage. So we have made a significant contribution and continue to make a significant contribution to the research that is still happening today. And most importantly, I think, you know, early in March, Matt gave me a call one evening and we said, we've got to do something about coordinating the research and spreading the research so that we give patients in Wales the best opportunity and best access to potential treatments that we're researching. And so this was very much behind what we've then achieved since then. And as you'll see from that map, we've spread those urgent public health studies that have been identified at a UK level right across Wales and right across the ability for patients to be recruited into them and those opportunities for trial treatments. So here I've just outlined, we've had over now 5,500 patients recruited into interventional studies, and we've done that across all hospitals, across all across primary care, across staff groups, and the map just shows there the extent of the studies that are active at the moment in Wales. It's been a real coordinated team effort, and one of the things that we've done, and I think worked together across all the organisations to enable happen. You'll see there the setup of research has been extremely rapid, unprecedented, to coin a phrase. Studies were being set up within 24 hours, and the average time of setup, you know, was less than a week. So we've really seen a real shift change in the way we set up research, and we've been reflecting on how much we keep of that in a post-COVID world or going forward. So the portfolio continues, and I've highlighted there, and Matt will come back to some of these specific studies, a number of the trials that have been in the press that you'll be familiar with. And our focus at the moment is on the setup of the vaccine trial delivery service, and so that we can support the delivery of the pipeline of of vaccine task force trials that are on their way to the UK, and ensure that Welsh participants also are included in that. So I'm going to hand over to Matt now, just to talk through the experience of what that's been like on the front line. Thanks, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicola. So my name's my life is split into three main sections. First of all, clinical intensive care medicine. I work in Cardiff. A third in terms of regional development in Cardiff and in Wales, and a third public engagement. And really what I want to do in the next 6 minutes is just to give you a flavour of some of the lessons that we've learned from delivering these trials. And what this 5,500 number of patients has done is pretty remarkable. What we now have, partially thanks to these numbers and the patients and the families and the research teams, from these two trials, REMAP CAP and Recovery, are two powerful treatments to reduce the percentage of those dying on a breathing machine by as much as a third. And these are cheap, inexpensive treatments, steroids, which we're familiar with. So that's a remarkably impactful intervention, which has been found in less than 6 months, with Wales having a huge contribution from that. So a massive thank you to Health Research Wales for that structure, to the teams involved in delivering that, and most importantly, of course, the patients and the families involved. Now, in this scientific meeting, I wanted to, instead of talking about science, I'm going to talk about something slightly different, and I'm going to use 3 quotes to illustrate some of the lessons that we've learned. And the first, I couldn't help but to choose an Aaron Bevan, fundamental to the setting up of the NHS, who said this quote: "The purpose of power is to give it away." And I think for me, what we've learned from delivering these trials in hospitals all over Wales is that the old system of a PI at the top delivering an intervention and having their name on a paper, that may work in some circumstances. It would certainly not work here in COVID. And so what we needed a way to scale that massively, to deliver those interventions safely, and to deliver the interventions in places perhaps not used to undertaking clinical research. Now, every institution across Wales has handled this differently. In Cardiff, we had 2 methods. We gave away this power, if you like. First of all, the R&D director, which was Chris Fagan, where I am, played a huge hands-on role in delivering these trials. It wasn't just the setting up and the governance, it was a huge hands-on role. And really importantly, we also empowered research nursing staff to go out and effectively run those trials in many ways and in many cases. In intensive care, often the consultants and the junior doctors and others were working extended rotas, night shifts, weekends. So we needed a reliable, stable, safe and skilled way of recruiting patients into what sometimes were relatively high-risk clinical trials. And I think this is a great jump-off pad to promote further not only nurse-delivered research, but nurse-led research. And I would challenge across Wales to at least start collecting the metrics on what percentage of trials that has this nurse delivery model or has this nurse actually led model. And I think that would be a fantastic way to do it. And look into the future, the people involved in those studies, the PIs, the CIs, this should be through skill and experience based, not position based. And so we really want to empower those who can deliver high quality clinical studies. And that was more important than ever in COVID. I'm going to go on to a second Welsh quote, I'm afraid, and this time it's from Dylan Thomas's poem on his 40th birthday, where he said, "Dark is a way, light is a place." And for me, working in critical care during the pandemic, it was a time, it was a dark time, and as it was for families and for patients. But what we managed to do is to frame expectations that coming into hospital if you're ill, being part of research, being part of clinical trials, all part of that service. And other specialties, like cancer, for example, have done this very successfully. Patients battle to be in clinical trials. And yet in acute medicine, in critical care, in other specialties, it's not that way. And so I want to see metrics such as in cancer. It's been argued that a metric of 1 in 6 people should be in trials who get admitted to hospital with cancer. I want to see those similar metrics in other specialties, such as the acute specialties, be it stroke, be it critical care, be it acute medicine, for example. And again, that's a challenge to health boards to actually get those metrics, benchmark where they are so that they can improve. And a final quote, I thought it would be relevant to include a Chinese proverb, which says, when the winds of change blow, some people build walls, others build windmills. And yes, this is an opportunity to radically change the delivery of research. We also have quality improvement, audit, service evaluation, research, which are often delivered in different silos. And perhaps this is a way that we can bring these things together. We should also be delivering research not according to a department, but according to perhaps disease collections. Why can't we deliver research in acute unscheduled care, whether it's pneumonia, whether it's stroke, whether it's heart attack, across the departments and across those specialties, rather than segregated by department? And one final thing I want to leave with in the last 20 seconds, and this is really a challenge to anyone listening, whether they're in industry, whether they're in research, whether they're in healthcare, whether they're a trust or not. Everything we do in medicine should either be evidence-based, which comes through clinical trials, or evidence-generating. And do we know a metric of the things you do in your institution, in your hospital, in your department, which are evidence-based, and even those which aren't evidence-based, which need an evidence base, can we transform that care into evidence-generating care? And that would be my challenge to the people and the staff who work in Wales. Thanks.
So just giving Nicola a chance to come back in there if you wanted to, Nicola. I assume you're you're done until you start getting questions. So Izzy, do you have any questions?
I haven't got any questions at the moment. No one's sent anything through yet.
Right. In that case, I'm going to start the ball rolling. I think this is probably a question for both of you, but maybe Matthew can start off. In my limited experience, the world of trials and clinical trials is I think Matthew's already mentioned evidence-based. They're very structured. Time is, they're carefully timed. They're very precise activities. Whereas the world of the pandemic, as those of us who've been involved in responding to it know that it's been urgent, sometimes chaotic, and definitely reactive, reacting to not only to people's specific needs, but also reacting to outside pressures, the press, and people's perceptions of what is urgent and needs to be done. So I just wonder whether you could tell us from your perspective how you felt those two different dynamics, those two different pressures acted against each other, or in fact complemented each other.
Yeah, that's a great question, and in fact, that's a wicked environment to try to deliver high-risk quality research when things are chaotic and reactive. And in fact, in intensive care, I guess we pride ourselves in trying to create pools of order in a sea of disorder. You often arrive on a scene where there's a patient critically ill, there's family there, there's lots of machines there, and you have to kind of structure that into something logical and something safe. In fact, the research delivered through COVID, I would say, has been none of those things. It hasn't been chaotic, and it hasn't even been reactive. In fact, the recovery trial was planned before the word COVID was ever known. It was a trial put in place expecting a pandemic to happen in the future. And, although the pandemic was unusual in terms of timing, this was always going to happen to some extent, whether it was influenza or SARS or COVID. So I think it's a great time now to plan for the future so that for the next challenge, which will be different, but will have similar issues, what's in place for that? And similarly, the model we used of having highly skilled research nursing staff deliver and lead clinical trials allowed it not to be chaotic. We weren't relying on us who were doing night shifts or working long hours, or we didn't have a rota from one week to another. It was reliant on a really structured, consistent team who could deliver trials safely. Because what we didn't want to do is to use shortcuts, which mean that clinical trials like this become less safe. That's not acceptable in a pandemic or not. And so that's one way around it.
To add to that, I think there was something really valuable about empowering about having a very focused single objective that resonated with every member of staff involved in research, but whether it was the person taking consent or the person looking at the approval of research or trying to set it up. It was very personal, because it was about creating the opportunities for ourselves potentially as future participants, and no other time has it felt more real that this is relevant on a very personal level to getting it right. And that single focused objective actually, really galvanized everybody to work together as a team. And I think we've got a lot to learn from that experience going forward.
Absolutely, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit more from our other speakers as well on exactly what the lessons are learned going forward. And I think some of them are there are some positive lessons that have come out of this in terms of for all parts of our sector about just how quickly we can respond when we're galvanized around a single mission, a single aim, and where things have been focused. So so thank you very much for that. So
one question for you guys just popped
go
up.
for it, Izzy.
Do you know what percentage of Welsh inpatients with COVID took part in recovery?
Yeah, I think that's from Kia. Do you want to answer first, or do you want me to?
You go, Matt. I mean, we've been looking at, how do we ensure that every participant has had an opportunity to be offered the opportunity to participate, and it has varied between different organisations. In some organisations it's extremely high. I haven't got the figures to the top of my head unless you have, Matt. But that's what we've been really focused on, ensuring that all the clinicians in all the departments know about the recovery trial and the other trials, so that when a patient is in front of them, that meets that inclusion criteria, that they are asking the patient or their relatives about participating, and that the opportunities that brings. So Matt, I know we've looked at some of the figures, but you may have it off the top of your head.
Yeah, data is a key metric here, and I think one thing that we do need to be better at in the future is getting accurate key data. It was difficult in the pandemic because where patients were being treated, physical geographical locations changed so much. So whether to class a patient as being in intensive care or not used to be according to the geographical position they were in within walls. But in fact, we were delivering critical care for critical people all over the hospital. So they weren't classed as being in intensive care. The overall figure is somewhere between 6 to 8 out of 10 people who were recruited or at least screened into recovery. There were some reasons why they couldn't go in recovery. This improved towards the middle and latter end of that really busy 6 to 8 week period. It was smaller in the first place. And as Nicola said, it varied widely across the institutions. There were some places that got up and running with other studies a lot quicker, such as REMAP-CAP and others. So it's hard to give a single metric to represent everything. But I think one thing we have learned is having some nuance in that data, especially when service delivery has changed so much, is pretty important.
Thank you very much for that. And Kia, I hope that answers your question. And a challenging question to put the team on the spot there, but I think well answered. So thank you for that. Right, so I'm going to move on. If anybody has any more questions for any of our speakers as we move forward, please just put them in the Q&A, and we will ask them in the chat. So if you think of something to ask Matthew once, but he's gone off screen, don't worry, we'll still ask him the question. So I'm really pleased to be introducing our next speaker. It's Pete Phillips, who's director at Surgical Materials Testing Laboratory. Now, I actually know an awful lot about what Pete was doing during the COVID crisis at its peak, because we were meeting on a regular basis as part of a wider response team, and I know him and his team put in a heroic effort in terms of trying to manage specifically the PPE shortages and challenges that faced. But I'm not going to go on any further because I might just be stealing all of Pete's presentation and thunder. So I'll hand over to you, Pete, and we'll chat again once you've finished.
Okay. So is my presentation showing, is he?
That's right, yeah, it's great.
Cool, okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Pete Phillips. I'm the director of the Surgical Materials Testing Lab in Princess of Wales Hospital in Bridgend. The lab's been around for quite a long time, established as a pharmacy QC lab originally. We have 22 staff at the moment, pharmacists, microbiologists, various technicians and researchers, and we're accredited to the international standard for testing laboratories. We're very active in committees and groups, particularly with standards, and we represent Welsh Government on various groups. We're part of shared services, NWSSP, the group where procurement is hosted as well, and various other bodies who have got a pan-Wales role. The sort of activities that we undertake include medical device testing for NHS Wales, but we also do testing for England, the MHRA, we do commercial testing for industry, and have provided quite a lot of support to DH in recent weeks. We provide a lot of technical support to our procurement services colleagues. We do work for CSSDs across Wales and endoscopy departments with testing water and devices and the environment. And we are the defect reporting centre for the Welsh NHS. We have in recent years started doing usability studies, and we have in the last 3 years kicked off the evidence-based procurement board, where we use the sort of HTA assessments that you'll be aware of with NICE to inform our procurement practice in Wales. And we support Welsh Government on lots of committees where medical devices are involved. So that's the background to the lab. So March 2020, we will all remember that. It was clear from the 18th of March, something like that, that the PPE chain, the business as usual PPE chain, personal protective equipment, was fragile. Our procurement colleagues were having lots of different suppliers knocking on their door, companies they'd never heard of before, but in the past they would have taken a very cautious approach, and it would have taken months for them to get onto their supplier books. But we were in a situation where we could not get hold of PPE for love nor money. So we repurposed our operations within a couple of days. Our operations, research and IT teams were basically set up to provide dedicated support for procurement. And our testing people, the guys in the labs, they started to concentrate testing on gloves, gowns and masks. Our research and development activities all went on the back burner. Half of our staff were working from home, the researchers particularly, but being the very nature of being a live laboratory meant that the lab testing staff needed to continue to work from the lab. And that provided its own challenges, in fact. I'm not going to go into that today. So PPE is a complex area in terms of regulations, because it is covered by a number of two bits of legislation and some other key elements then. The first piece of legislation is the MDD, the MDR, the Medical Device Directive, which we still have in place, and the medical device regulations, which are in transition and taken over from the MDD. We have the PPE regulations, and then we have easements, which are in place, and they're things that were brought in March through the European Union originally, and then adopted and tweaked by each of the national governments. In the UK, we have OPSS, the Office of Product Safety and Standards, and they own the PPE legislation. And they produced a number of documents to deal with high volume manufacturers and small scale manufacturers. And the MHRA produced derogation. The MHRA own the MDR legislation. Alongside that, we have the IPC Guidance. The 4 nations have a group of infection prevention nurses and other infection prevention specialists who agree what the PP ensemble that ought to be worn for different situations. So it says for aerosol generating procedures, you need a type 2R surgical mask, or you may need a respirator, you'll need gloves, you'll need a fluid impermeable gown, and they have different scenarios and then different bits of PPE that you need to wear. And all of this stuff has to join up with what we actually purchase. Now, the IPC in their document, they use the terminology you can see on the screen there. Fluid resistant surgical masks, disposable fluid repellent coveralls and gowns. And one of the problems that we have with some of the terminology they used is that those terms were not the terms that all the standards were based on. So IPC said fluid repellent gowns, but the gown standard has tests for resistance to fluid penetration. We don't have a standard for surgical masks. We have a standard for medical masks. And I know you may think, well, this is angels dancing on a pinhead. How much difference can that make? But when you're dealing with manufacturers who are making claims, you need to be fairly clear what standards they are complying to or complying with. There's no mention of isolation gowns or thumb loop gowns in the IPC document, and yet we found ourselves in a situation where we were buying shed loads of isolation gowns and thumb loop gowns, and because neither the standards deal with it nor the IPC documents, we were having to try to come up with performance requirements for these as we went along. And in fact, the minimum specification for these have changed 2 or 3 times in the last 6 months. The minimum specifications were rushed out in March and have had to be changed twice since then. And this made the procurement landscape particularly difficult, I have to say. So part of SMTL's role was to try to help them navigate through the complexity and confusion. And it has been tricky. I think manufacturers and procurement and the regulators, all of us have had a difficult time trying to work out what we should be purchasing. A part of that has been exacerbated by the fact that we've had to make decisions very quickly, whereas business as usual, a procurement contract, we will start looking at it perhaps 18 months before we let the contract. We've been looking at making decisions in less than 24 hours for some of the projects in the last few months. So I'm going to speak about some of the counterfeit products that we've come across and some of the fakery and fraud that we've seen. This is how the procurement process pretty much worked for the last 6 months. Life Sciences Hub did screening of potential suppliers. Procurement then would look at the stuff that had come through from Life Sciences, and if they think, okay, these are providing something that we want, and they look a reasonable bet, they came through to SMTL. We would then do an assessment. I'll explain more about that soon. And then a decision would be made by procurement. Do they reject this supplier? Do they go ahead and say they want to purchase? Or do they need further information? Quite a lot of people didn't have the right information. We went back, asked for more documents, came back to us, then back to make a procurement decision again. If they got through the stage to make a decision to purchase, sometimes it's straightforward. Business as usual purchase. You've got a supplier, everything's lined up. We make the purchase, stuff goes into stores. Occasionally, procurement were under the cosh. They had to make a decision to purchase very quickly without all the appropriate documents. In those cases, sometimes the compromise was that they'd make a qualified purchase. So they would say, okay, we will place an order, because if you couldn't place an order by midday tomorrow, say, we would lose a production slot in China. So they'll say, we'll make a purchase, but on the basis that when the product hits the UK, stuff goes to SMTL, we will either do a documentation review at that stage then, or we will undertake laboratory testing. And that may end up with us completing the purchase, or it could end up with us rejecting it. There are some times when the further information meant that we didn't have a CE marked product, and this is where the easements come in. And then we had to go to the decision-making committee or the MHRA or the health and safety executive, and they then would have to make a call as to whether these products were suitable and acceptable to be bought without being CE marked. In the early days, there's quite a lot of that going on. There's less of it now because we have more secure supply chains, and the new entrants to the market are becoming CE marked. What did we do then in SMTL? So the questions we were asking is, do they comply with the regulations? What class or category is the device? Because that's important to know what documents they should be providing. Do they have a quality management system in place? Are their certificates fake? Are their reports fake? Do they actually comply with the standards we were interested in? So there are standards for masks, gloves, and gowns. And we have not lifted the requirement for compliance with the core elements of those standards. They've been relaxed in some cases to not require every single element, but we need to know that these things are going to protect our clinicians. Are the test reports from a competent lab? We've seen lots of test reports over the last 6 months from laboratories who we suspect have never tested these devices before, and where we are suspicious of their test results. Is the quality management system relevant to PPE? We had some quality management systems through, some certificates that said we have a 9001 QMS, but it was for making LED televisions and not making PPE. Has the quality management system been issued by somebody who's actually authorized to issue a QMS cert? Once we'd been through all of those questions, we would produce a decision document that explained our findings and went to procurement and told them what we thought the next steps ought to be. We looked at 333 sets of documents, and each of those sets could be 20 or more certificates and reports. We looked at thousands of documents in the last 6 months. 66 of the documents were either suspect or fraudulent, and 50 of the submissions had fake or altered reports or certificates, where they'd changed the manufacturer's name. Perhaps they'd used a test report that was completely irrelevant to the device we were looking at, or is a test lab making up results, or making a completely fake certificate from a legitimate notified body. Sometimes they submitted third-party assessments of compliance, which look legit, but are not. So we had test reports from a laboratory called ZTC. We had 3 lots of these. I'm not going to pull those up now, but we were looking at masks, respirator masks in this particular instance. Up here in the top right corner is the laboratory's unique report number. This is a test. These are test results for sodium chloride, and it's a count of the percentage penetration of the test aerosol. And you can see we've got 5.6, 5.7, various figures up here. What we have here is from the same laboratory, a different date, a different supplier, a different product, and this is a different report number, but all of these figures are identical. Same test in laboratory. This is for breathability through the mask and some other filtration figures. I won't go into detail what these mean, but these are to do with a particular leakage test you undertake. That's for one product. This is for a completely different product. And yet you'll see 90, 90, 100, 100, 120, 120. these figures are all the same. Now, what's quite interesting is that when you look at the test report, you'll see this is to EN 149. That's a European standard for respirator masks. They're the sort of the molded masks normally that are used to protect the wearer. And helpfully, the test lab puts a picture at the bottom of the test report. And if you look at this, you'll see that this is not actually a respirator. This is a surgical face mask. So they have actually, in their own report, proven that they have not been able to test to 149, and that those results, you cannot get those sorts of filtration test results with a surgical mask. We also had notified body fake certificates. There's a notified body in Poland called IPC Polska. They issued a statement saying that any test reports that come through MyCare's equipment has not been reissued and remains an invalid or fake report. And we had plenty of these coming through. IPC Polska, a legitimate body, but this is a completely fake report. You can't see it on there, but if you look at this segment of that, this is a test report from Shanghai MyCares, and this is one of the reports that's completely fake. I define most people to look at this report and know it's a fake report. The only way you can do it is by going to each of the notified bodies, the issuing authorities, and checking whether the particular report number was legitimate. So what went well? Well, we detected a number of fake submissions, and therefore we prevented the purchase of non-effective PPE. Welsh Procurement were very successful. They provided a lot of mutual aid to England and other devolved admins when they had shortages, particularly in the area of gowns. We had very good joined up working, I think. We had CERET, which is an Industry Wales-led team. We had the NHS with procurement, ourselves, and clinicians working well. The life sciences had played a blinder in this. Welsh Government were heavily involved, and academia. So from day one, pretty much, I think, from end of March, all of these were linked up and are still continuing to work together. In England, the DH had to bring in the Ministry of Defence technical assessment experts to help with their certification and QMS assessment, interestingly. And by the way, the guys I'm talking who did all the work at SMTL, they were working crazy hours for the first 2 or 3 months, and my respects to them and my thanks go to them for the hard work that they did. We have now developed a local PPE manufacturing cohort in Wales, which will hopefully reduce the risk of disruption to the supply chain. We punched above our weight at the national level as well, working with NHS England and Improvement, the MHRA, DMC, the Health and Safety Executive, NHS Scotland and Northern Ireland, and with manufacturing organisations and industry in all of the devolved admins as well. And SMTL, one of the key authors of the minimum specs. There's some links at the end, and I'm happy to provide a PDF of this, which will have all the links in there then. What didn't go well? Well, internally, our R&D work had to be put on the back burner. Some of our work for commercial customers and NHS customers have been significantly delayed because of our refocus. We had not anticipated that how long the pressure, that is going to be 2 or 3 months of sort of 7-day weeks. None of us anticipated that when we started this period. Expectation management with new suppliers has been difficult as well, and we have had to tweak specifications as we went along to make sure that everybody understood what we required in Wales. There's a lack of testing capacity globally, particularly for medical masks, and this also exposed vulnerabilities in our supply chain for PPE. Hopefully some of the local manufacture will help us in future pandemics. And I think it took a while for the UK as a whole to settle on the right skill set to enable us to make the right decisions for the non-CE mark product in particular. And it's taken us 3 or 4 months to get the appropriate minimum specifications sorted and to deal with alternative devices that are new to the NHS. Another problem we had is suppliers who didn't want to listen to advice and therefore wasted weeks in some cases until they could become compliant. Welsh Industry was terrific. We provided testing to them and support to companies who are embarking on PPE manufacturing for the first time. And come to the end now, so I'm going to skip. Oh, there we are. This is the last slide I want to deal with, actually. Yeah, procurement colleagues. They've ensured continued availability. We haven't run out in Wales. We believe we have a sustainable, secured supply of PPE for the future. And they have provided advice and support for local industry to help them understand how to bid for Welsh business. And they've also stepped in to support local government and authorities with PPE procurement. So that's me done. There's a bunch of links there, which I'll provide to Izzy, and she can circulate the PDF then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pete. I'll add a couple of footnotes to that, but I noticed that you've got a fair few questions, so I'll let Izzy come in and do the questions in a minute. But just one of the things I would say is that SMTL, and yourself in particular, provided a remarkable service during that period. My involvement was that I was on secondment to that life sciences hub bit of Pete's flowchart. So we were working at the front end, and I can add, whereas you reviewed 333 products in detail, prior to that, at the very front of the funnel, there were 2,500 equipment offers coming into the system and the life sciences hub and Welsh government. So yes. So it was a unique time, and just to put that into context, that was nearly 100 a day at the peak of the time that we were trying to manage those offers. So SMTL really was standing in front of a fire hose of inquiries and trying to sort out the genuine high quality product offers from the more questionable offers in real time without causing any delay. And I know your team did. I mean, you provided those guidance documents that you mentioned very quickly in one of your slides there, that they were a real resource that everybody could use. There was a lot of one-to-one advice and guidance going to industry and seminar presentations. So it was fairly remarkable that you managed all of that. So I hope you've had some holidays since then. But one of my questions is, moving forward, are there things that are going to stick in terms of the processes, or are there things that are still required because we're not out of the woods yet? Yeah.
So I think, yes, there are things that are going to stick. I think in the past, we've done certification assessments for procurement. I think now we have a changed global supply scenario now, and I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that. And what's actually happened inside SMTL is that we have upskilled staff who didn't really do this work before, but there's going to be a continuing need for them to do this work. I think there's also some stuff that we're having discussions with. For example, because of the global shortage in testing capacity of surgical face masks, we are having discussions with the Welsh Government about perhaps developing some face mask testing capacity. We're still away from agreeing that, but we are making some strides in that area. And I think across the UK, I think there are some opportunities to continue the joined up thinking that's never happened before. We've never had HSE, MHRA, NHS England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland sitting down on a regular basis discussing the legislative requirements and performance requirements of these devices. So I would hope, and I don't know how it's going to work, but I would hope that continues, because that has been incredible. The fact that we've had, at one stage, the DMC, the Decision Making Committee, was meeting daily because of the amount of PPE problems we had. And to have all of those experts sitting down and being able to make decisions in an hourly call every day was revelationary. I mean, terrific. So I hope something like that continues. We haven't got the urgency now, it is different. But I would like to see something like that on a UK-wide basis continue.
Thank you. And now I'll hand over to Izzy, who's got some quite chewy questions to ask you.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of questions here. Firstly, a lovely, nice comment from Pierre Lewis. He says, as a frontliner, I want to personally thank Pete and SMTL. Amazing work.
Pleasure, Kia. Yeah.
And then, so I've got, it's sort of 3 in 1. I'll say them all, and you can ask me again if you need to repeat them. How long will the easements by MHRA be in place for? Will they be affected by an EU exit and or the process of device approval / CE marking?
Okay. So there's quite a lot of stuff there. So I specifically asked OPSS and MHRA last Friday about when the easements would come to an end, and the reason I was asking is because there's building work going on outside. I'm afraid if that's coming through. My concern is if we have suppliers in the NHS at the moment who got through on easement, when the easements come to an end, they can no longer supply if they're not CE marked, and that could constrict our supply chain. So OPSS said they have no plan at the moment. They see the easements continuing until December at the moment, and unless government makes a different decision. But at the moment, they assume they're going to go on until the end of this calendar year. Nobody quite knows what's going to happen at the end of the year. I think it depends on what if the supply chain looks secured. If they think the supply chain is secured and they won't need to do this, and there's enough CE marked product available, then I suspect they will bring the easements to an end, because the process of dealing with the easements means that the MHRA, who don't look at individual devices, that's done to notified bodies. That means the MHRA, the regulatory body, are having to make decisions about individual devices, and they're not geared up to that, and it's not scalable in the long term. So it'll have to come to an end at some stage. We don't quite know when. My gut reaction is that nothing's going to change until December. In terms of CE marking, there's a lot going on with that, and I can't tell you exactly how that's going to change in terms of easements. If you aren't aware, the MHRA published advice on the 1st of September, I think, which basically puts in a new system for regulation of devices, which kicks off in January this year. There's a transition period where CE marking will be acceptable, but we will then transfer to a new system over a period of a few years, where we have a GB marking for the mainland, and then we have a more complex system for Northern Ireland, which I won't get into now, but they will accept CE marking or the GB marking, is my understanding. There's a very good document on the MHRA's website, which if somebody emails me, I will send a link and you can then send it out. But it's not completely clear what will happen to easements after the 1st of January, because they've all been driven by the EU directive so far.
That's great. Izzy, can I just suggest at this point that we've got 2 questions from Andrew Davidson, both very good questions, but one more general and one more specific. So could we ask, for the benefit of the room, Andrew's second question was, is PPE more prone to fake products than other sectors? And is this a specific issue affecting COVID-related products?
Mm-hmm. So no, we've seen our fair share of fake medical devices as well as PPE. I think this is down to pressure on the supply chain and manufacturers who have seen the opportunity for a quick buck, and therefore coming into an area that they have no experience with. Normally, we buy from companies with a track record, experience in the medical device or the PPE arena. The issues we've seen, I think in many cases, have been driven by companies who, the companies that we normally deal with, they would not have let these test reports get through to us in the past. They would have picked them up and they would have rejected them. It is just down to the urgency and the fact that everybody was scrabbling around. So I think that this is all down to the unusual emergency situation that we found ourselves in, Gwyn.
Thank you. And I would agree that there is some very unique characteristics of this situation, or as you said, but right at the beginning, that a procurement process could take 18 months just before you go out to procurement. So there was a lot more time for reviewing the validity of products and of certification in normal times. So maybe that has an effect as well. What I'd ask Pete is if you could take a look at Andrew's other question, which was around the effects of the recent announcements from the UKCA, rephrasing of MDR. I was wondering if you could reply to that in the chat so that we can make time for Kia, who is our next speaker. So I wonder if you could help us by doing that, Pete.
Okay.
If you can. If you can't, then we're trying our best, Andrew. Moving on, Keir's already mentioned himself as a frontliner. Very much the case. Keir is he's medical director of the Respiratory Innovation Wales, but also an active consultant. So I will allow Keir to introduce himself and to present on COVID, a district general hospital perspective. Keir, the screen's yours.
Thank you very much. Isabel, I don't know if you got my slides there. Great. So I'm going to speak on behalf of Prince Philip Hospital. I hope you can all see it. Go to the next slide. These are the doctors who work with us doing getting this data. Several things happened, as we all know, but one of the things that we did notice in the West is we had that extra time zone. If you can just click next. So as the virus was coming west, we had that extra 10 days to prepare. That was absolutely crucial for us as a small DGH, because there was only the sea left behind us and there was nowhere else for us to go to. What we learned in those 2 weeks was fundamental. Luckily, people like Life Sciences, Big Pharma, put me in touch with people from China and Italy, from Wuhan. And also we were all talking as chest physicians, and I had some great help and pointers from the Gwent, and particularly Sarah Fairburn, telling me what to expect. And as we had those extra 7 days, we did lots of reorganization that we were learning from other people's problems and what happened to other hospitals. Next slide. We're a small hospital, and basically in those 7 days, we changed into a green hospital and a red hospital. We divided it right in two with a door right in the middle. Next. There was a door in the middle. So the green zone, we redid the A&E to go through the main entrance. It's completely revamped the whole hospital, blocked off doors, moved ambulance bays, and we had the time to do it. And again, next slide. In the middle, we had a barrier that was taped up, and we kept all patients, all staff completely separate, and put the rest into what we call the red zone, the COVID zone. And if we go next. So this was a small area of about 6 wards with its own entrance. Yep. And there's a door in the middle from the other side. It's nice and bright on our side for some reason that day. The sun was shining, but no one was allowed through that door, even in emergencies. Next slide. What we did, we had our own staff entrance, what people call the leper's gate, where we would get changed and we would move, and none of the staff were allowed to mix at all with any of the green side. Next. And we moved porter cabins at the back, where we could call people up through the back entrance of the hospital from their cars to be assessed directly or via ambulances. Next slide. And people were brought in directly and assessed. And many people did not want to come into hospital. They were worried and they were very scared, but they were more worried about coming into hospital and being placed next to people who we knew had COVID. So moving people further back, almost like a McDonald's, you see people in their car, like we test people in their car, we could actually use these porter cabins to great effect and to limit any spread for people who didn't have COVID. And next slides. In the front bit, just around here in the hospital, that's our main area where we had staff bays, and our staff actually could sit and drink and eat in the little room to the left, but that was our main central bay. And 90% of those staff at this point were volunteers. All the consultants who voted to go into the COVID rota and run our own separate teams and our own different on-call system we divided half our staff to do green and half to do red. So clearly our working weeks doubled. But most people are junior doctors, and certainly all the older consultants were all volunteers, where the hospital director said, who wants to go into the COVID zone, before we knew what we were dealing with. And it's that kind of commitment that the NHS workers should be proud of. Next slide. We had a small CPAP bay, and you can see some of Pete's PPE all modelled by us well. You can see it's all passed its tests. And we're grateful again for Pete for getting these things to us. And the other side of those doors, if you can just click next again, then we have more people gowned up where the patients are. And the reason why we have different security areas within the hospital, from high, medium to lower areas, depends on whether we do these things called aerosol generating procedures. And this is where we put tubes in down people's throats or masks on their face that theoretically would spread the virus more into those high risk areas. And we had urgent work with our estates to put little seals over the doors. You can see the white seal on that red door, completely not quite airtight. It wasn't negative ventilated. And the other good reason we chose that bay, because it was separate from the rest of the main corridor, but it had big windows. Windows helped ventilate the room, and the weather was very nice at that time. And it also allowed people, dying people, to see their relatives through those windows and talk through those windows at hard times rather than just on iPads. This was quite important, and we learned within the first week how important that really was, to have some sort of communication with your loved ones during these isolated times when people are actually put in single rooms or 2 people to a room for up to 3 weeks at a time. Next slide. And again, as we evolved, we had a separate ward built further down with boards around where people would get changed inside there and then move into those CPAP bays where we were putting people on the masks and where the highest risk contaminated patients were. And this really helped us, the learning from the grant in particular, how many outbreaks you're going to have in different parts of your hospital, to seal it off as quickly as you can and move people from green to red as soon as their swabs were positive, as well as through the front door. That's how we designed our hospital. We go next slide. So we divided it into 2, and both worked almost autonomously. But what we did do, we had a daily handover. Isabel, this next slide. So the green and the red team, we would VC. We were only 10 meters apart, but it felt like we never saw them for 8 weeks. And this is a handover kit that we had every day. We had where the patients were, which wards they were in, what were they positive, were they queries, but we didn't have the swab results back, were they on ventilators. But we also developed this over time. So we said how many people in medical doctors were off sick or were ill, how many people were isolating, what nurses were off sick. So we could plan our rotas literally, as Matt said before, every single day. And in a small hospital with not much staff, you have to be very careful how you balance the staff from day to day. If we zoom in on the next slide, we can see the other things we kept a record of. So we had a list of all our PPE equipment in stock, where they were, how many we had. And it felt like a war in that you had a central supply area organized by procurement, but then I moved various small offices and small rooms near the front line. So we had almost like a frontline supply at the trenches, and then a backline supply for things being pulled forward as we run low on the equipment. And if you look at some of if we go to next slides, we had lots of machines. And that particular day, we donated 200 ventilator CPAP machines to an Iron Bevan as they were being overwhelmed. The next thing we got, we didn't plan, was we got enough machines, but we were running out of masks circuits. So we thought we had 319 pipes to connect the machines, but we only had 99. And we had to get those pipes quickly. And that was classic kind of procurement things that we got wrong. We buy the machines, but not the connectors. If you go next again, you can see that we also had a percentage of oxygen being used. I'm not sure if I can see behind the screen here, but we had a daily level of how much oxygen was left in the hospital. And we soon learned that certain things called high flow oxygen machines were using up to 20% of the oxygen supply with just 2 patients over 1 day. So if we had 5 patients, we were going to lose all our oxygen supply. So clearly we had to adapt within the first week on using different types of machines, which actually were equally as good. And again, a States department would send me a WhatsApp every night on the phone to tell me how much oxygen was left in the hospital, which again has never been done before, but common sense. If you go to the next slide, the other thing we did overbuy. As you can see, we had 20,000 masks at one point being ordered from Philips in the mask scramble that Pete talked about. We actually pushed back a lot of that, as clearly the numbers weren't happening. The other thing to note, if you just go next slide, this is just a daily handover. We did have enough masks. At that point, we had enough little goggles and visors, but it was a time where we almost ran out. One day we had 4 visors left, 28 patients in, and one patient had learning difficulties and was spitting and biting us, so we really need to wear the masks at that point. And when we did run out, well, we were low on masks. We literally used volunteers, if you click next, local business people and others to move masks between hospitals in their own cars for us, so we could get enough each day of the handover. And we also had a clinical learning update. So we learned every day. This was one of the most strange illnesses I've ever seen. And a lot of our previous learning and our normal protocols on how to deal with low oxygen people were completely not relevant here. 25 years of experience we threw out of the window on our very first patient when all our protocols completely broke down. And we were quick enough to adapt, I believe, by changing our clinical learning every day. We wrote it down and we distilled it to the rest of the hospital and the other 4 hospitals on our health board. If you go to next slide. And what I learned, again, with the help early on with the people from China, was there's 3 different phases of the illness. So there's an early phase where it grows in your nose and you feel a bit fluey. And I said, people asked me in December, are you worried about this virus as a lung doctor? And I said, no, because the first 7 days is just going to be, people are going to be unwell. And then if I do become sick later on, I go straight to intensive care. And there's not a lot for me to do as a chest physician in between. I got it completely wrong. It's those middle 7 to 15 days where we based all of our treatments. We front-ended into the hospital with a consultant on call every day, 2 consultants for a lot of the days. And now it's day 7 to 15, I think, is where the battleground needed to be really fought before they got to Matt's intensive care system. If we go next, and we learned each day. So we do know now that when you're feeling a bit fluey, the only treatment is bed rests, possibly paracetamol if you've got fevers and aching joints. And the next bit we learned every day, this is where the general hospitals would do their best. So people needed oxygen, these CPAP masks, which I'll show you quickly in a minute. When people changed into that second part of the illness, we started to give steroids as part of trials, but also off trials, because we could see they were saving lives. We gave antibiotics if it was a pneumonia, and we gave other drugs as part of different research trials. But that orange bit is what consumed us for 7 to 10 weeks. Partly driven by necessity. Prince Philip Hospital only has 6 intensive care beds. So we had to learn, and we had to put our battleground at the front, not after day 15. And we learned every single day, painfully and with great success in some circumstances, how to manage that middle orange bit. Then the final bit after day 15, we were learning that either you got better and you recovered, or you were kept palliative and you were kept comfortable. Very few people ended up on a ventilator. I'll show you in a second. So what we really had to learn quickly and around the world with daily contacts was that middle bit. Okay. This is an example of someone who was in the middle phase. This is a blood test called CRP, and it's what we call C-reactive protein. You can see the numbers on the left, but the graphical bit is their change from the 8th of April to the 22nd of April. Normal levels of CRP in us is less than 5. So you can see how high it went. And if you click next, each time they deteriorated, each day we gave methylprednisolone, we give high dose steroids, and this wasn't part of the recovery trial. And ethically, I was struck here as a scientist and as an R&D director, that when do you randomize people into trials, or when do you give someone a drug? And you could see he got worse. We gave him methylprednisolone. That's the only thing that changed. His CRP got better. Then he deteriorated again 4 days later. Then we gave more. Then we switched into a normal dose of steroids when we thought he was right. And even on the 18th of April, you can see 10 days afterwards, he was still given a little bit of inflammation, and we gave recurrent steroids. And these are very, very high dose, and they do have side effects. So the question we were learning every day, and not only being part of randomized trials, but as Matt said, generating that evidence for future trials or for future care, is we treated each individual as a very specific person. If you go to the next slide, and this was his x-ray when he admitted. You can see the white shadowing in both of his lung fields. And you can see he's 39 years old. He's a young, fit man who was a semi-professional sportsman. And you can see the improvement by the end of April over just 8 days. And I don't really see a condition do this florid changes in the lungs so quick and yet recover so quick as well if you get them on the right treatment. He didn't need CPAP or ventilator despite such x-ray changes. If you want to go to the next slide, this is another patient who lasted longer. The CRP kept going up and down, deteriorating, and you can see how his x-ray varied as well. And we would discuss every patient in the CPAP bays, and we defined them as being in that acute phase. The middle phase was the high risk phase. And each day they'd have bloods twice daily and being reviewed by myself and my 4 colleagues, with all the team around us. And we would make a decision each day about what dose of steroids to give, how to get off, what kind of machine we would give, how we would give it, and for how long, because there were no guidelines. Next slide. This is one of our first patients on a CPAP machine inside the CPAP bay. And again, you all know this, that the nurses again were volunteers, and they would spend 4 to 5 hours each day with that patient, because if they changed over every 2 hours, we would use up all our PPE. So they were volunteers, and they stayed in for twice as long as we should be staying in. If you protect yourself with all the right PPE and you put people in rooms, there is no increased risk of people being infected with CPAP. And indeed, across the UK, we know that CPAP does work. I'm a fan of it, and we found it does reduce the need for people to go to intensive care to have intubation, and it also helps people get out of intensive care quicker to save you intensive care beds. It's your experience with these CPAP machines, which we are lucky that we're quite experienced with them. We normally use these machines for something called sleep apnea, but we adapted them very quickly with different settings and took away different masks and pipe fittings to use them in this sort of critical care kind of setting. Next slide. And the reason why, those of you, I'm a lung doctor, we have these little tiny things called an alveolus in the middle of your lungs. And what happens with COVID, it affects the lining of these tiny, tiny sacs. There's about 100 of them you can fit on a pinhead, but that's where oxygen goes into your blood. And what we believe now is that those little alveolus are damaged by the virus. And what we were learning is if you give ventilators and you breathe people up and down a lot with high pressure ventilators, that alveolus is already damaged and it leaks even more. And it could be that using high pressure, certainly, but if we have continuous air, not up and down air, but just continuous flow of air, like a diffusion gradient under slight pressure, you rest in that alveolus, but still allowing oxygen to go in and out of the person and helping them breathe with less movement. So we think mechanically CPAP may help and can be useful here. And this is some work we've been doing with DSTL in Porton Down about the lung damage from a basic science level. We have a next slide. So this is our data. We had 187 people admitted over the 6 to 7 weeks that we did this data for. And we compare our data with the UK cohort. It's 16,000 people admitted across the UK in the ISARIC database at the moment when this was done. We had 332 contacts to the red zone. of which we discharged 150 at the door or at the porter cabin. So only just over half we admitted. And you can see the kind of age was, the average age of ours was similar to the UK. 60% were male. The virus does affect men more than women. Interestingly, we had a high level of cardiac. So if you go next slide, a lot of our people in clinically have got high blood pressure and cardiac conditions compared to the UK average. Next slide. And these are what our outcomes were. So we were very happy that only 0.5, 1 out of 187 people admitted were ventilated on intensive care, compared to 6% were intubated nationally. And our death rate again is favourable compared with the UK average. And there's lots of reasons for this, and we're still looking at what we did differently. And a lot of this was protected because our general numbers were lower than other places, so we were never overwhelmed like other places. But I think there is something else going on here as well. If you look at the UK, next slide, 17% of this time was still in hospital as well, so even a higher proportion of those than 33% would have died of those admitted to hospital with COVID. And if you look at the health boards, we're looking at this nationally. Hywel Dda is the 3 in the west, and a lot of our death rates is because we just had lower numbers as well, and our systems were never fully overwhelmed like some places were with the sheer numbers. I think we also learned, and I'm so grateful to my colleagues, particularly in the southeast, for telling me how to divide your hospital and stop your hospital being overwhelmed, because you only need 2 or 3 outbreaks on different wards at the same time, and you've got 30 people that you suddenly need to isolate and know where to put them, or 5 members of staff off sick. So I think it's that hospital organisation that we can step back to very quickly that the Welsh NHS did really well. If we go to next, these are the people, our first 10 deaths. Every person who died with COVID was investigated by myself and 2 others. And you can see the average age of people dying. And most importantly, we know that, well, everybody who died in our unit had multiple other illnesses. So the younger, sicker people were really ill, but they tended to do well. You can see the age, but the number of people with morbid or severe obesity or dementia or heart conditions. And the rough time from symptoms to death is between 7 to 10 days. So again, they were in that cytokine storm, and they were going into that third part of the illness. We did give ICP, means integrated care pathway. And I think this is so important. If you go next slide, I can guarantee that every single person who died did receive morphine and midazolam before they died, and we had time to keep everybody comfortable, and everybody was dignified as they died. So the 27 people who died up until the end of July all received care pathway. And what we did and what we had to do, and we insisted, was as soon as someone comes in with COVID, we would write in the notes, what is the escalation plan? How far do we go? Are they for intensive care? Would they be for resus? And you can see our youngest person who died was 60, but he had what we call end-stage renal failure. He had known heart failure, and he had known liver failure. So he had multiple conditions. And of course, when you have multiple problems and multiple organ failure before you get COVID, if you get COVID, we would not want to put you on a ventilator because you have a condition so you would not survive. And it's that critical planning at the outset we learned every day, and we refined it every day. If we go to the next slide. The other thing that we did, we had a very high level of discharge rates, and as soon as anybody was discharged from the ward, we gave them a pulse oximeter. We bought 250 pulse oximeters, and we classified them as high, medium, or low risk. And if we thought they were high risk of relapse of illnesses, or the duration, if they were still in that 10 to 14 day middle period where things can get worse, we gave them the oximeter, and the GP would phone them within the same day on discharge and each day for 2 to 3 days, and they would show their pulse oximeter to the GP on WhatsApp. Low risk, it would just a text, or GP would see if needed. And we'll be presenting this in a different scenario, but the different setting. But what we found is that this was very popular with patients and with primary care follow-up. So we had a plan of what to do if his pulse oximetry changed, and indeed it did on at least 3 patients, and they were readmitted. And they felt that someone was watching them, even if they couldn't see their GP personally. The fact that someone would phone you and check your oxygen levels and you'd write it on the screen meant a lot to many vulnerable people. And they would return their machine at their pulse oximeter after 8 days. And what I learned about the illness is, I touched on it earlier, everything I learned had to go out the window quite quick, and we could not do protocols. Every human being had to be managed as an individual, and in larger systems, if you have protocols of what we were traditionally taught, if the oxygen levels are this, you must do that. I found some very bizarre things. The very first patient, his oxygen levels was 67%. It's almost incompatible with life. Yet he's on his mobile phone talking to his wife as he came into the hospital, and it was just bizarre. So we learned on the spot. And what we found, particularly in Prince Philip, is if you empower your local teams, your local managers, and you give your consultants that local power, we could manage it better than anybody, because we knew what to do, and we knew the layout, we knew the geography, and we knew the numbers of patients. But we gave daily feedback to the other half of the hospital, so they knew what we were doing, and we could move patients between the two quickly. And that feedback stops people being suspicious of other people as well. Next slide. We did the research. This is another thing we learned. Our research nurses we embedded within the COVID unit. So they every day they were part of the red team. They were seeing patients, and we recruited into all those various studies. IMRES C19 and CPEX R8. These are the ones underlined that only our hospital was doing. Trying a new experimental ventilator made in Ammanford, or working with the immunology with the Porton Down Army experts. And they were working with us, and that's really good. But of course, we had to recruit, and we did recruit into those big studies that were game changers that Matt and Nikki mentioned. We're now looking at something called PHOSP, and also looking at the excess mortality. So going forward, we look at the excess deaths around the world are high during the pandemic for non-COVID stuff, and how do we now, as an NHS, gear back in and deal with that? And that's now our current biggest pressure. We should be working back on our cancer cases and our cardiac cases, because they all died much more than expected during this period, and it's very sad. Next slide. Everyone's worried about the R value in Wales. It is low, but it's quite important.
Here.
Yeah, and this is the last slides. If you get an R value, it's low. We hopefully won't get a spike, but if it goes up, we can get those later spikes. So people are modeling where we are at the moment. Next slide. And it's just many thanks. These are the doctors and nurses from part of our COVID ward. And if you want to watch their stories or how we did it, we filmed it as we went along, which is a really interesting and hopefully a historical document. Most of the people were interviewed, from managers to nurses to doctors, and it's just how they felt as they were going home, a bit like the Gwent one, and that's available at the link below. And finally, it's about the patients clearly, and our patients' stories are the last slide as well, if you click. And again, if you click on that link, then you can see some of their stories. And we filmed them at home as well since discharge, so their stories are quite powerful, and they're good to help other people. So many thanks to all the other people in Prince Philip.
Wow. Kia, what a tremendous story and a tremendous presentation. And thank you very much for that. That was, I know from the comments that we're seeing that everybody was really appreciated that unique insight into how it all felt from your perspective and from the front line and your team. I just interrupted you at the end there because we do have a couple of questions, and so Izzy, if you wanted to just pick a couple of the more Relevant questions for the whole group, then maybe Keir could answer those, and then the more specific ones, maybe he could answer in the chat.
Yeah, and I know you've got to rush off at some point as well, Keir, so we'll just do one, shall we, for now, and then we can get on with the other ones. So a nice one here about sort of across Wales. So how was the learning and best practice shared across Wales? Obviously, you mentioned talking with Anna and Bevan, and have you been in touch with the other health boards across Wales?
Yeah. The lung doctors all know each other. Most of us train together, and the Respiratory Innovation Wales RIW did a lot to connect us as well. But I think it's also people from England, friends. So mobiles, we had Teams meetings, we had debriefs, and also it was really interesting that some of the pharma industry funded these international webinars at 7 o'clock in the morning. On a Saturday morning, I was on a webinar to China, and that kind of learning before anything's published, speaking to the doctors in Wuhan. And it's amazing, they all spoke very good English. And across Wales, we cascaded in real time. And it wasn't just the lung doctors, it was the intensive care had a superb network. And the medical directors did, the managers all learnt. But internally, connecting internally between two halves of the hospital was absolutely bizarre to do, but worked.
That's really great. Thank you for that, Keir. And yes, I take the point. Izzy said you have to rush off, but maybe if we can just you could just have a quick look. Okay, so if you could have a quick look through the chat questions, there's quite a few, and if you just click to reply to all panelists and attendees in that chat, then everybody will get to see your answers. So
yes,
I'd really appreciate that.
Q&A as well. I think if there's someone there as well, you can answer.
Excellent.
And have a look at the videos and give us feedback. I'd be interested, because this is the first time we put them in the public domain.
Definitely will, and we'll promote them more widely if you'd like us to do that, Keir. So I'm going to move a little bit further east now. I'm going to Cwmtaf University Health Board. We've got Tom Powell, Research and Innovation Improvement Hub Lead, and Jason Ingham, Senior Chief Maxillofacial Technologist. And Tom and Jason, if you're there, then the screen is yours.
No. Sorry, Hugh. There we are. Can you see us okay?
We can, yeah.
Lovely. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dr. Tom Powell. I'm the Innovation Lead here in Cwmtaf Morgannwg. I'm here in a socially distanced manner with my colleague Jason Ingham, who's the MaxFac Dental Lab Manager. I'm going to very quickly set out the progress to date in developing some innovative 3D design and print capacity in Cwmtaf Morgannwg. It's really taken on how we've repurposed some of the existing 3D print and design work that's been taking place and been able to expand it with colleagues from the Accelerate programme. So we've all been well versed in the pressures of change and impact that COVID has had on us. And we've done some really interesting work. Jason and his colleagues, who've started off repurposing the 3D printers that you had in the dental lab around some PPE and door handle work that was going on in Prince Charles Hospital initially, but then was rolled out across. Generally, I'll let Jason say a little bit more about the work of the dental lab, but they had a couple of SLA printers that they were using and a dental scanner, and I was able to secure a few extra PLA printers from a local school. Thank you, Stanwell School in Penarth. I said I'd give them a shout out today. And we've been using bits of that to turn some of the equipment and gadgets around COVID that we're using. Part of this is also, though, that there's a COVID outcome. So when COVID stops, the ability that we have is going to last and move on. And so it's really changed the innovative ways that we've been working. But I'll cover a bit more of that at the end. Jason.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So, as I mentioned previously, I'm Jason Ingham from the Maxillofacial Laboratory. During the COVID period, obviously all dentistry and all elective surgeries ceased. So it's a matter of what do we do? Do we just sit around twiddling our thumbs, or do we think of other things that we can make? And then looking through online and seeing what other laboratories were making, the first thing that we came across was the door handles. So door handles that you don't need to actually hold on anymore. You can just use your arm and hook your arm around and open the door. Obviously, infection control loved this idea, so we put that in production and put those around the hospital. And then from there, we had a word with clinical engineering, and clinical engineering thought, oh, actually, you've got 3D printers. things were, the departments don't really seem to talk very well in the hospitals, so we don't really know what each other's equipment we've got in the laboratory. So clinical engineering said, right, okay, we've got these parts for machines that basically we can't get hold of during the COVID period. All of the supply chains to China sort of dried up at that point, and they were looking at 9 months waiting lists for bits and bobs, so there was lots of machines that they couldn't repair. So we ended up redesigning the parts, printing them off and being able to fit them to whatever machine we can. And these machines were then well used. And then since then it's sort of grown. We've had people from neonatal asking us to see if we can design something that will hold a pen torch and a tongue depressor, so they could be a bit more distance from the patient rather than looking as close as they usually are. So we've designed that and they've worked really well. We've also designed nasal swabs, so we've been working with South Wales University and designing specific nasal swabs so they can go in and do COVID testing. I know that you heard from them last week. And then we've been designing lots of other stuff as well. We've done exhalation valves, ear molds. We've been making bits of scuba masks, or trying to make bits of scuba masks. So that's how we're really at first all started off. And then in this video, you can see a new piece of software, if it plays. Here we go. So you can see this new bit of software. This was funded through the Accelerate Fund. And basically, it's allowing us to segment CT scans. So we've got the usual CT scan that you can see on the right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, then this creates a 3D model. Well, for non-clinicians like me, 3D models are a lot easier to assess, a lot easier to see and analyze than the CT scans.
Yes,
but also
you've got your screen up. We can't see the video.
Oh, no. Oh, really? Could you see my slides up till then?
No, we didn't think you had slides.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm really sorry.
I can share anything afterwards as well, so don't worry. But if you want to pop the video up now, then do go ahead.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I was just about to say it was a really nice new way of presenting, standing up and not using slides.
That's been loads of work on getting lots of nice slides and nice videos for you. But oh, sorry about that. I thought you could see all the slides. Anyway, I'll carry on and then I can share the slides and the video with you later on then.
That's fine, yeah, we can share it to everyone that was registered.
Lovely. Well, anyway, this bit of software that you can't see is brilliant at looking at the CT scans and then creating 3D models. And those 3D models then that we can either analyze on the screen, or we can manipulate them. We can, if it's like a fracture that needs reducing, we can reduce that fracture on the screen and on the 3D model, and then we can print them off as we want them to print it off. So they've been fantastic diagnostic tools. And also from there, we can print off bone plates and different, sorry, I'm completely thrown now. So from there, we can print off lots of different models, whether it be bone or soft tissues. My next slide has a picture of a model of a spine and a model of a heart. The heart, with this project, this Accelerate project, we've been able to purchase a 3D printer, a specifically 3D printer that prints in multiple colors. So we can print off a heart off in multiple colors. So different ventricles, different veins will be different colors. And then these can be used as diagnostic tools. So any surgeon or any cardiac surgeon then can come along and practice the operation before he actually opens up the patient, which I've been told is a really useful tool to have. He can also open the heart up, open the model of the heart up, and almost experiment on it to see what might work and what doesn't work. The picture of the spine was there, just so that we've printed off quite cheaply somebody's spine, and then anaesthetists now can practice their injections on that spine. So some of all these things have seemed really working well together. Right, over to you.
Hello everyone, sorry about the slides. Hopefully we can share them around at the end. I really advise you to have a look, because some of the stuff that Jason and his team have been doing here has been excellent. So really the Accelerate program, who came in and found out about the work that Jason and his crew here were doing, and they've really supported us, and it's allowed us to actually expand out the work that we're doing that really is still quite COVID focused. We're going into the community and working with primary care colleagues around ideas and innovations they may have, and then we're using the design ability that we have here and the links to industry that have come on as well, and the academic partners to actually realise some of that sort of work. So it's that sort of COVID dividend where the new way of working that we had to take on has really resulted and in a new way, and hopefully it's going to keep going for the next couple of years until the end of the project. Lovely. All right, thank you. I think that's probably us done. I'm sorry about the slides.
That's great. No, we can share them with everyone, not to worry.
Thank you, Izzy. Cheers.
Absolutely, and I genuinely meant it. I thought, oh, that's interesting. The guys are standing up and presenting. I thought that's. And if you'd got a bit of 3D printing in your hand as well, that would have been perfect. Excellent.
There's a door handle. There's a hip, and here's a hip that we've done.
Lovely, brilliant. That is.
Sorry.
That is great. Another thing, just for the panelists and for the delegates that aren't aware, we'll send a link through to the Accelerate program, because I think it's probably applicable to some of the other people who are viewing today. An opportunity to take advantage of funded academic support and resource, and so we'll share that link as well. In the meantime, has anybody got any questions for our two panelists?
Questions through here.
Okay, so if you have any questions, please just stick them in the chat or stick them in the Q&A. And guys, are you around for a little while? Can you
yes,
pick up on any questions?
I think Jason might have to pop off, but yeah, I can answer.
Jason's got work to do. Okay. Oh, that's brilliant, and thank you very much for that. Right, I'm going to move on to another program that I know has had some publicity recently, and move to North Wales. Betsy Cadwaladr, University Health Board. I'm going to introduce Sarah Bent. She's Principal Clinical Scientist, Audiology, and the presentation is Clearview Mask Innovation Project. So Sarah, the stage is yours.
I think we're just connecting.
We don't. We have Sarah. Now we want to see
slides. Sorry, I lost all form for a second there. If I do that, can you see the slides there?
No, I haven't got them up.
Hang on. Let me just press the other button. Share screen.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Phew, we've got them.
Great. Oh, fantastic.
Thank you, Sarah.
Good news as well. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm presenting on behalf of our Clearview Mask Innovation Project team. We started up in May of this year, and we ran as a short-term innovation project through until August. We came together through the MSpark COVID-19 Health Hack back in the end of April into May. And we came third in the health hack, so we received a £2,500 funding award from our RLAS, which was later matched by the Accelerate programme. We were 6 of us that came together during the NSpark hack. Normally it would be something on a day where you're face to face and put together in a room, whereas we did it on a virtual basis. So we came together for one webinar, worked together over the week, and then presented at the end of the week. And as I say, we got a funding award as a result of that. So the issue that we wanted to work on was around face masks. And that was the pitch that we put together initially. Problem with face masks, as I'm sure you all know, is that they're physically a barrier to communication. They cause muffling of speech. The other person's unable to lip read, and in a lot of cases, therefore, unable to understand what's being said. There's also issues around the care and support. There's good evidence out there to show a perceived lack of empathy when somebody's wearing a face mask, perceived poor care or service, and generally a lack of understanding again as a result. The impact of all of that is in communication breakdown, also fear and anxiety, and I think that we particularly saw that right at the start, before people were used to somebody interacting with somebody wearing a face mask. It was all very new to everybody, but also there's a causing dependence, where people would usually interact independently, were having to rely on others due to the inability to communicate. And generally, as a result, the wearer of the face mask has just been having to pull a face mask down to be able to manage. You can see some photos there from a care home for adults with learning disabilities up in North Wales, where you know, a resident there who was hard of hearing just couldn't communicate at all, just didn't react when somebody came forward with a face mask on, but a beaming smile when the face mask was pulled down. Quite often the reaction that I've had was, well, I get it, but how many people are we talking about here? Well, if we look in terms of Wales, 1 in 6 people have a hearing loss or a deaf, so we're talking around 500,000 there. Similar sort of proportion of people with mental health concerns, more like a tenth of that in terms of adults with learning disabilities, similar number for people living with dementia, and around 20,000 people are living in care homes. But if we flip it around the other way and think about from a clinician point of view, we've got around about 60,000 clinicians across Wales who are then dealing with all of those patients, but also around, again, 1 in 6 with a hearing impairment themselves. And on top of that, social care staff and frontline workers, of course. So in terms of the regulatory approval for these, what we needed for health and social care was either level 1 or indeed level 2 PPE, appropriate testing, and Pete's already touched on that and has been a massive help throughout this project. But also ultimately approval for use in NHS and social care. A lot of standard considerations of face masks are relevant around the fit to the face, the skin sensitivity and comfort, but a lot of the options at the time were ones with a flat barrier in front of the face. So potentially we have to think about CO2 build-up as well. And indeed, if you Google, there's an amazing video online from China of a sign language interpreter who made her own plastic face mask for interpreting in Wuhan, and she could manage round about an hour of interpreting before she fainted on the stage due to that CO2 build-up. But at the end of the video she said for Wuhan and for China, and she carried on. The key thing at the time when we started this health hack project was that there was nothing to be able to ensure that these products were fit for purpose. When we're looking at a Clearview product, we need to make sure there's no barrier to speech production, that they enable visual communication, but also that they enable empathy and emotion to be conveyed. As I say, that's a problem area as well. So what were the options at the time? Nothing approved for NHS across the UK. There was some local production of a use of a solution in Southampton, where the clinical engineering department produced their own hoods and respirators, and so there's a regulatory sort of bylaw where that means that they could then use those locally. And there's a photo there of the audiology team going around with their full hoods and respirators. And whilst the reaction is, gosh, that's too much, they said actually it was wonderful to have the air across the face in a hot scenario. The non-approved possible considerations that we had in front of us were the cloth and homemade reusable face coverings that were starting to be made by people at the time. There were some disposable face masks, primarily in the US, but we had no approvals to use them, but also there was no supply of them either at the time. But there were also other transparent reusable designs around, not necessarily suitable, but that were indeed have, you know, some level of transparency, such as used for in cycling and diving and such, but basically nothing. So what we did is we used the expertise that came together within that week within the team, and then we drew on additional support available. Life Sciences Hub and Accelerate have been mentioned plenty today, and we also accessed Agora IP in terms of patenting considerations. Pete's been amazing through all of this, but also the teams in Improvement Cymru and over in NHS Improvement, and many, many more people. Over a couple of months, we created a 3D printed prototype. We were thinking if nobody else is coming up with anything, we could at least have a prototype that could then go to further use. We designed and completed some remote user testing. The ATIC team that's part of Accelerate programme have a computer software that is able to look at emotional responses and facial recognition, but that was only done face-to-face at the time. So we've explored a remote version of mission testing as well. On top of just purely looking at products, we've also engaged in regulatory discussions, as I said, provided an advisory role to companies that were thinking about potentially developing something, and a lot of work's been done in that area. And also we've put together a research innovation project design with Bangor University as well, looking for future funding. So I'd hope to be able to share a little more specifics on the outcomes today, but we're just finalising the publication at the moment. So the outcomes that I can share today is that we have been able to evidence the need for evaluation for fit for intended purpose, not just the safety aspect, but a Clearview product needs to be fully evaluated for does it meet the need that it's designed to solve. But also we've got some evidence as to how the products perform that are available or under consideration at the moment. So there's the safety aspects and how you appropriately test for some of these products, as well as the fit and comfort, but specifically this impact on the ability to convey empathy, convey emotion from the perspective of both the wearer and the recipient, and the ability to speak, but also to understand the speech that's being used. Delighted to say that as of this week, clear masks are now available for NHS trial. These are the ones that one of the options that have been manufactured in the US. They actually started with a startup fund back in sort of about 2015-16, so they did have a head start on everybody else. They've been approved for use by HSE under the easement, although local risk assessments are suggested. Small allocations are coming through this week. It is very, very small. The intention is that it's for a trial purpose to start with. We need to evaluate the demand as well as the details for use. If anybody's interested, I can actually provide support on that. And then future UK supply, the intention is that that will be through NHS supply chain, and the company are seeking CE marking as well. That, as I say, it's just under the easement process at the moment that their approval is underway. We're also supporting potential future projects under development, including some level 2, because Clear Mask is only for a level 1 approval. And also, as I say, we've been applying for further research and innovation funding. So if you do want any more information on either the project findings, the publications and possible press around that, please do get in touch with me. Any support in terms of the NHS trial of these clear masks that have come through from America, but also any advice in terms of development suitability of Clearview products. And I'm working with Life Sciences Hub with a few companies at the moment. Or if there's any possibility of funding for further innovation of research, specifically an outline that we have with Bangor University that we'd be keen to get funding to take forwards. And I've also been working on Clearview face coverings for public use, even though I haven't covered that today. So if there's any inquiries around that, I'm more than happy to help. And there's my email address there. So hopefully that gives you time for some questions as well.
It definitely does, Sarah, and caught me on the hop a little. No, but I mean, what a tremendous case study. And I mean, I started hearing questions right back in was it around about May, when people were saying, is there a clear face mask? And it was for people who were deaf and people who had learning disabilities and other situations where a clear mask, I think dementia was involved as well, wasn't it? Where obviously being able to see people's facial expression and being able to see their mouth was a definite benefit. So I'm really pleased to see that you've pushed this forward and come up with some results. And what a tremendous case study that includes health boards, Accelerate, ATIC, Bangor, government, the Hub, AGOR, SMTL, Improvement Cymru, NHS Improvement, and I know I've made digging myself into a hole here because I've probably forgotten one of the organisations that you've mentioned, but it is a really nice example of where in Wales we do work together well, that we really can achieve something. So congratulations for getting this far, and I'll assume that the next challenge is for it to be fully commercialised and manufactured in volume, so that you can roll it out, and so that it's available not just across Wales, but hopefully across the world. So good luck with that. Izzy, are there any questions to Sarah?
We've got a comment from Andrew Davidson, but I'll let you follow up with him in the chat if that's okay, so we can get Helen, our last presentation, on in time.
And we are just about right on schedule, so I will hand over without too much waffling. So Bevan Health Technology Exemplar, Helen Iliffe, who's project lead, and another project that I've seen get quite a lot of publicity, and rightfully so. So it'd be really interesting to hear more about the Distance Aware project. So Helen.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to present some of the work today. So I'm Helen. I'm an anaesthetics trainee based in Prince Charles Hospital. I'm also a Bevan Health Technology Exemplar, and through that I got to know Baroness Finlay, who is my Bevan mentor, which is how this whole project came about. I had a conversation with her back in June about some of my anxiety relating to social distancing as shielding measures start to be de-escalated, because I've been shielding myself. And we went on to write this article, which got published in the BMJ, exploring concerns around de-escalating shielding. And within this article, we proposed this idea of some kind of safer at 2 meters badge. It saw an incredible response and nothing like we anticipated. And I think within 3 days, I'd had in excess of 400 messages asking me, were we going to produce some kind of an identifier that people could use to ask others for space. So we put this Google poll out and shared it through mainly Twitter over 10 days with 8 questions, just asking for people's opinions. And what we found was that we got 1,750 responses, half of which were people were shielding, a good proportion of people were shielding by proxy, and then about 35% of people who weren't shielding, with an overwhelming majority thinking that it was a good idea to enable people to self-identify as wanting their social space respected by others in some kind of a way, but with also an even greater proportion of people thinking that it could help some individuals who felt vulnerable or worried during this transition period into whatever this new normal is going to be. They felt that it was really important that we had some kind of a consistently recognizable symbol or design. And 99% of people said that if they saw somebody wearing something that they recognized, they would respect the social space and they would keep the distance. So there's an overwhelming understanding of personal responsibility and a willingness to be compassionate towards others. We also asked those who weren't shielding if they would consider wearing some kind of an identifier saying that they supported ongoing social distancing and wanted others to maintain space, with only 20% of people saying that they wouldn't and over 50% saying that they definitely would. With a couple of themes in the comments, people were worried that if it was an exercise that only looked at shielding individuals, that you would then end up labelling vulnerable people and people who already felt vulnerable, making them targets, and it would end up being quite a disempowering exercise. That there needed to be a certain amount of understanding and awareness, and also that there needed to be no text, because if there was text or anything on something, it would encourage people to come closer to read it. There was also this much wider feeling that it needed to be for everybody. It wasn't just shielding, and that reflected the need for ongoing social distancing in society. We worked with a number of charities. These are just a small few that were involved closer to the beginning. We're now up to over 185, I think was my last count last week. And what we came up with, a week to the day, we published a second article in the BMJ, which was for us this kind of evolution of a solution to something that didn't have any text, was bright and contrasting in colours, so it was easily noticeable. There needed to be a couple of different colour options to make it maximally accessible to different groups. So we worked with the RNIB to make sure that it was wholly accessible to those with visual impairment, but also with disability groups, to make sure that it was accessible to people with mental health and mental capacity impairment as well. It needed to fit into a professional space, be clear, be simple, but most importantly, it needed to reflect that wider societal need for social distancing, not just for those who were shielding. We presented it to Welsh Government on the 30th of June, and it was endorsed by the First Minister and the Health Minister on the 2nd of July as an NHS Wales initiative endorsed by Welsh Government. And by the 3rd of July, they'd found us one of the PPE suppliers for NHS Wales who had agreed to cover the cost of an initial 130,000 badges for free distribution throughout Wales. This is a symbol, so it's a shield-shaped design with a double-ended arrow, so we're all protected at a distance. There's been some people who thought that the shield was maybe more subjective to those in the shielding group, but actually when we looked at different shaped signs, they were automatically associated with things like road signs that already existed. And what we found is that there's huge enthusiasm for all of the different options. We've now got, following initial introduction into NHS Wales, the 130,000 badges that were initially distributed the demand was so high that Welsh Government has now funded another 200,000 badges and 40,000 lanyards. So there's in total 330,000 badges and 40,000 lanyards that have been put in from NHS Wales, supported by Welsh Government. There's also a huge number of charity partners who have produced their own versions of the badge and the shield shape, which they've then distributed through their routes, with one of our charities that has joined, giving me numbers last week that they've had since July 4,000 individual requests for badges, with 7,000 in total being distributed to different units in their field of care. The scheme has since been endorsed by the Department of Health and Social Care in England, with some lovely quotes from Her Majesty's government, and Minister Gething has been unbelievably supportive. I cannot express how supportive Welsh Government, Chris Jones and Minister Gething have been in this initiative. Without their support and without their help, it would not have happened at the speed it has happened. It's a symbol, it can be put on anything, reflecting the need that everyone is different. So there might be somebody who for some reason can't wear a badge but might be able to wear a lanyard for different physical disabilities. We've got a website on the Bevan Commission's website, so it's bevancommission.org/distance aware, and we've joined with a number of charities who are now producing badges, but also with a number of British manufacturers. So We Print Lanyards are a British manufacturer. They've made lanyards available through their website. They're giving 20% of the proceeds to NHS charities together. Also, the London Emblem is a British manufacturer of badges. They've made badges available through their website for different organisations. And then a number of the charities, like I said, have produced their own badges too. Twitter have been amazing and created us an inbuilt emoji. So if anybody uses the hashtag distance aware, it automatically pops the shield on the end of it. And these are just some of the tweets that have gone out. Kidney Care UK have been an amazing ally in this. They've been unbelievably supportive, and they've seen a hugely positive response from their community as well. And these are some of the fantastic comments that we've had. Those are my contact details. If anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. Thank you very much.
So I can imagine the number one question on everybody's mind will be, where do I get my badge?
So if you're based in NHS Wales, they've been distributed to trusts. So there's trusts and there's badges and lanyards available through all the different trusts. They're distributing them all out slightly different. Trying to work out a national distribution network was interesting in 2 days. So the health boards have gotten their allocation and they're distributing them slightly different. The easiest way to get hold of a badge or a lanyard is to go to the website and get one from one of the charities or online.
That's brilliant. And again, what an amazing story about around collaboration and around a number of organisations coming together. Obviously, is yourself at the heart of this, who's been championing this. But I've heard the story about the success of the badges and just how much they've been the must-have fashion accessory across the NHS for a couple of weeks now, and it really has gone. It's really gone far and wide. So congratulations to you, and really well done. Izzy, do we have any questions?
I haven't got any through, but I do have a comment from Pete who spoke earlier. It says, "That's amazing, Helen. Congratulations."
So I think that's probably a sentiment that we all feel, and let's do our best to get it out there even further for you. So I'll definitely be on. I'm not a big emoji user, but I'm going to go and find the emoji on Twitter and make sure that we use it.
You don't even have to find the emoji. If you just put in hashtag distance aware, it'll automatically pop up.
Right, so there's a challenge for everybody who's on this webinar today. You have to use the hashtag, use the emoji before the end of today. So thank you very much for that, and what a really positive way to complete today's presentations. We've been on a real roller coaster. We've starting with clinical trials and Health and Care Research Wales, the tremendous work that Pete and his team have been doing through Surgical Materials Testing Lab, really inspirational talk by Kia, and a frontline perspective on managing the COVID crisis, and within that one, a real story about how necessity breeds invention or innovation, and the adaptations and the changes and the developments that Keir and his team have made while in the middle of managing the situation. But also, again, his connections across the UK, his connections across the world. So a real lesson in collaboration and learning. And I know that a lot of people have been very generous in their advice, guidance, and support in all sectors in terms of addressing COVID. Thank you so much to Tom and Jason, and we will make sure that we get those slides out and the film. And thank you very much for your presentation and another way of addressing the challenges and the use of 3D printing to specifically address challenges as they come through the door, producing products that help the situation. Thank you to Sarah. The Clearview Mask project, I think it's had a tremendous start, but but we really now need to support that getting into manufacture and being produced in volume. And then finishing off with Helen and the Distance Aware project. So really do appreciate all of those speakers and all of the speakers and delegates throughout the whole program of our event so far. We've had over 360 delegates to our event so far. We've had over 30 presentations, and we have the final event in this program, which is on the 22nd of September. That's our digital event, and it would be really great to see everybody attend there. So I'm going to leave it at that. Say thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Izzy just to see if you've got any final housekeeping or comments. Izzy?
No, that's everything. I'll share the recording round to everyone that's registered, and of course the slides that we missed from Jason and Tom. And if you've got any questions or want to register for the event on the 22nd, then just drop me an email.
That's great. And Izzy, you'll have put out information about the MediWales Awards over the last couple of days. So would you like to just remind people about that?
Yeah, that's right. They're open for applications now. We've got industry and NHS categories. Welcome to everyone from Wales. All the projects, doesn't just have to be about COVID, although I know this series is open to everything that's been going on to apply, and it's not an incredibly long application, so it shouldn't take too much time. We'd love a lot more this year, and we're looking at how we can share even more of the stories this year on our digital awards, which will take place on the 2nd of December.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody who's attended, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.